Evgenia Emets, a very warm welcome to Plantae Convivae's In Convivium interview series. How are you today?
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much for having me. I'm good. I'm waking up here in my beautiful land in Portugal. It's very sunny. It's full
Oh,
of life.
wonderful. Well, I'm envious. We've got life here as well, but it's not. We haven't got the sun, unfortunately. But it's coming this weekend, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, a quick bio. You are a visual artist and a poet working at the intersection of ecology, language, and collective memory. And your practice explores how we relate to land through ritual, storytelling, and co-creation with place. Now, as always, artists seem to play a pivotal role in shifting our ontological gaze, our sense of being in and with the world. We met, can't exactly remember how many years ago, but a few years ago now, and you gave a wonderful contribution to a trilogy of webinars I was co-hosting with Resurgence and Ecologist magazine. And the title of that trilogy was Celebrating Weeds in Art, Science, and the Everyday. And you gave a wonderful presentation about celebrating weeds. And that included a number of very inspiring artists from all around the world who are in their own way working with weeds and helping to reframe them in our kind of collective consciousness, if you like. And I will add the link to the video for that in the show notes so people can explore that. It's a great presentation. Um, Now, as an artist, you're also very much community focused. And your big project, which will feature in today's interview, Eternal Forest, seeks to weave ecological community in space and in time, and beginning in Portugal, but not limited to Portugal. So I'd love, as a start of a 10, for you to kind of introduce the Eternal Forest project to us, please.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for this beautiful intro. Um, so I'll start with a little bit of a story, of a background story, just to give people who are going to watch and listen a little bit of perspective where I come from as a human and as an artist. So I moved from UK in 2017. I moved to Portugal to make it my home. And it was quite an interesting entrance and an interesting transition for me. I guess that in 2017 I experienced what I can still consider one of the biggest cultural shocks in my life, which, speaking about what a shock can be, I mean, it was really all encompassing. It was ecological, cultural, spiritual, and it opened so many questions. And what triggered it was seeing the aftermath of fires in Portugal that year. Um, we arrived after a kind of a honeymoon that was a delayed honeymoon after I got married to my partner, Victor. And arriving to Portugal, we were invited, we were very, very lucky. We were invited to a grassroots initiative called Reflorestar Portugal, Reforest Portugal. And it was their first event after the fires, big fires in Pedrogo Grande, that these fires were on the television. And the reason why these fires were on television is because people died and lost lots of houses and land and so on and so forth. But little did I know that these fires happen in Portugal and actually in many places in the world every year. So this is our new reality that we are living. So I decided to try to open a conversation about it, and first of all, to understand what is actually happening in the land, in people's lives. And what I started seeing is this kind of deep disconnect between people and what we call nature, which after 8 years now looking back, I mean, of course, we know that we are one with nature. We are of nature. We're like the whole word nature is just such a thing, right? It's such a construct. But what I was seeing back then is people are very attached to the land, but people are using So there's a lot of this kind of using. The land has to produce. The forest needs to be productive. Otherwise, it's not useful for us. So we don't use or we don't welcome specific species of trees. So what we ended up is this kind of contrast of having this very beautiful country, specifically Portugal, totally populated by monocultures of eucalyptus, which is both the program from above, so the program that the government offered to the country along with European Union to produce paper, just for context that people understand kind of the expanse of the tragedy. And on the other hand, people kind of biting into that program and saying, okay, we're going to take it because it's fast cash and we're going to grow these trees everywhere. And actually, a lot is private property. So people growing these trees for money. And so we ended up destroying here large swaths of perfectly biodiverse natural forests. The last ones that were preserved after, years of and centuries of kind of colonization of this land, and also Portuguese going out to colonize other countries and using the resources that they have. So the story is very, very deep. And what I'm trying to describe here, well, I'm kind of approaching to share why I started Eternal Forest, and really what I'm trying to do is, I think that the cultural depths of this tragedy and this disconnect, it's layer upon layer. And so addressing this is not just, oh, let's just plant some trees. Actually, it's how can we truly re-inhabit that place of connection, of belonging, of stewarding the land in the best possible way so the future generations can find it better than we found it. And so Eternal Forest really started from that opening possibility to listen to the communities, to listen to the land, to really understand where is my place in that big movement that is happening, regenerative movement, ecological movement. So I really came to it not being an ecological artist, let's say, but more like what can I do specifically to support that movement? And so I saw very quickly that my role is creating physical spaces. So Eternal Forest's role and dream is to create physical spaces everywhere, which we call sanctuaries, where trees and forests are forever protected, but they're looked at as both cultural and natural space. And we bring art as active tool to create beauty and to create experience in this place so people can have a direct experience, emotional and physical experience, and can then through that connection, reconnection, can then take care of this forest. So the project started in 2017-18, and it evolved from through many different stages, creating immersive trails, exhibitions, films, and finally we're arriving to the point that we start having the first pilots in Portugal and also in other places. And so our dream is reconnecting people who want to become stewards of future old growth forests into a large network and supporting them, giving them tools, giving them possibilities to actually protect forests rather than extract from them.
Mm. It's a very inspiring project, and I wonder a number of things. But there's a lot of, still strong traditional culture in Portugal. And as you've outlined, you've been very active in engaging with that culture. Any project needs to do that from the grassroots up rather than imposing anything. How have you found um, the response from those traditional um, communities to what you're seeking to do, and how does it relate to, there's some wonderful traditional agroforestry model, which I think in Portugal is called Montado, and Dehesa in Spain. I may have that the wrong way around.
That's correct.
Um, but some very rooted, sustainable models, and I wonder how that fits in with your vision?
Yeah, it's really good question. So I am very much aware and I've researched and I've worked in the Montado ecosystem or within the area where Montado ecosystem is being practiced. Specifically in the middle of Portugal, it's called Riva Tejo, so it's along the river of Tejo, Tagus. So let's try to put it like this. Montado and the Hesse in itself, yes, it's correct that there are present agroforestry systems that are currently being practiced in Portugal and Spain and parts of the US actually. What I found out by digging and by doing extensive research while I was working on such projects, these ecosystems are in deep state of degradation, and there are many different reasons for that. So before we got machinery, where people started plowing those cork oak. So just for people to understand, montado, when we're speaking about montado, is the combination of cork oak and holm oak forests or stands, I would say, of trees. There are pretty much no other trees involved. So cork is for extraction of cork, and holm oak for the acorns to feed the pigs. And that's the combination of things. And then you've got grasses growing in between. And that's all your biodiversity. And then, of course, there's birds, there's insects, so all of that. So the problem with Montado in Tejese is there's been a lot of plowing, and oaks don't like this because they have, the roots are very, they're like circular and they're superficial. They don't really go deep, so we cannot plow these trees or around these trees. But there is a deeper problem that I think scientists have started understanding since like 70s. I've read books and articles. So look, when we're talking about forest ecosystem, there is a reason why forest is resilient in itself. When we have a number of species, there are relationships between species, there is a level of complexity in forests. When we start taking things out because we want to have a specific ecosystem that serves our needs, we at first it seems like everything is doing okay. There's nothing wrong with just taking out a few species because we are not using them for that specific purpose. So our focus is that, and nature is that, right? Or endless, actually. So what started happening with Montado and the Hesse is gradually over a period of some hundreds of years, those trees, even they could continue because they are very resilient, they started being weakened because nothing in nature can exist alone. And when we choose one specific species, I don't want to call Montado a monoculture, but it's very close to monoculture. And a lot of places, I mean, I've traveled the whole country, they are drying. The trees are literally falling, they're dying, standing, because they cannot live alone and they're very susceptible to diseases that come through water streams. That's as much as I understand. These trees usually have buffer trees around them, buffer bushes, etc. But once you remove all of that, they become very, very, very susceptible to all of this. So I'm not saying anything against Montado, but just to say that one of the biggest producers of cork oak, Amorim, I was in their conference already many years ago, and what they were saying that they're going to start planting cork oaks extensively with irrigation. I mean, it says something, right? It just means that, okay, they want to increase intensity and capacity for the trees to produce bark, and there is a trouble coming. So I will kind of want to move away a little bit in this conversation from talking about productive forests because that's not what we stand for. I have a lot of respect to Portuguese people in their relationship and their connection with the land. And yes, there is lots of traditional communities beyond the Montado ecosystem in the north. There's much, much deeper connection, I would say, than I observed in the center of Portugal, for example. People really stand for the water. They really they really live from the land, they really plant biodiverse, they really try to increase the capacity, the fertility of the land. They look after the levadas that were brought by the Romans.
Mm,
But we already have a lot of places where this relationship is broken down. And also with the rise of capitalism and individualism, what's really breaking down is the commons.
mm,
And that's where I think is the gold that we can work with. I mean, UK had incredible history with commons, right? So now we have very similar in Portugal, different conditions, different historical situation. So now there is potential to not only bring back the commons, the baldius that existed before the dictatorship, and people used them for many different reasons. Usually they were like least fertile land, but people used them for goats, for sheep, for wood, for fodder, etc. But I'm talking about also these commons, but also the new commons. How can we create commons everywhere? Every village can have, whether it's a common space or it's a common forest. That's what we are proposing. The forest that the whole community or specific people from the community can take care of across generations. So I think this is where really taking care of a place and going there and knowing it and tending to it together as a community can actually help rebuild community,
mm.
because the sense of community has been coming apart. The fabric of community that has been around for centuries has come apart just in the last 150 years. And that's, I think, probably one of the biggest tragedies.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, commons, you can readily see them as an intergenerational resource, not just for human beings, which leads into this idea of old growth. And I would have interviewed or requested an interview with you long before now, but I've got a post coming up relating to old growth. So hopefully they'll dance together quite nicely in time. But yeah, and before we go into that, I just wanted to kind of, you probably are aware also of a wonderful organization that I had the great privilege to meet briefly in Portugal when I visited a few years ago, Eco Interventions. And of course, there's agroforestry and then there's agroforestry. And the way they are regenerating the cork oak forests further south in Alentejo in Portugal is very different to some of the agroforestry systems. And it's multi-layered, very holistic in its design. And so I'd encourage people to kind of explore eco interventions if they're interested in that. But then there's a difference again to old growth. I mean, typically, the kind of the old growth habitat that I'm most familiar with is that of British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island or North America these days, which is a different kind of ecosystem to where you are in Portugal. But they have very different structures and characters. Um, and yeah, I mean, let's talk about old growth then, because it's what do you see um, as the key value of old growth vegetation and plants and indeed cultures really. And I know in Germany a few years ago I read about their a kind of political consensus that they'd arrived at to actually have 5% of the forests in Germany um, kind of moving towards old growth status. I mean, yeah, outline from your point of view the value of old growth vegetation and ecosystems.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful question. And I think I'd like to start by saying that to those who are going to watch it, if you have never visited an old growth forest, just like give yourself the gift of going there as soon as possible. There are plenty in Europe. So we've got some stands in UK, in the British Isles, and they're recovering, and some of them are going towards old growth again. There is a benchmark forest on the border of Poland and Belarus. So you can easily go to Poland to Białowieża forest. It's easily accessible. You can find some very good guides living locally, and they can take you into the highly protected area. And there are a few more that, like Romania has some really good forests, some old growth. Białowieża is considered to be primary forest, which means that most of it has never been cut, and there is good reason for that I can explain later. But what I invite you to observe when you visit those places, or even when you can go to the memory of being in such a place, or those of you who watch this from the US, where there are benchmark places from 500 years and further up in time. I think there is something about the presence that we experience in these places. So old growth forests, and you actually just said something super beautiful. You said, I don't know, what was it, by mistake or intentionally, old growth culture.
No intention. Yeah.
Exactly, old growth culture. So imagine it's not just the stands of trees that are beautiful. Sometimes they're not even big. The oldest trees in this planet, they couldn't find them because they're actually kind of crooked and small, and they were looking for big trees, but they're actually small trees that they found, right? But anyway, going to old growth. So there is a sense of presence, the sense of it's like maturation of spirit. If we talk about this presence, this intangible, the spiritual, the emotional, you are in an ancient cathedral, basically. But then when we go a little bit kind of down to earth, and we start observing the patterns and relationships that have emerged with this time frame of 500 to 1000 years at least and more, I think what is happening is the complexity grows with time. So when we're talking about undisturbed or old growth or primary forests, we're talking about the increase, the time starts behaving in a different way, and the increase of complexity is such that certain elements, organisms, and relationships emerge that would have never emerged if this forest was cut every 100 years or something like this, so would be harvested, let's say. Because there's something about things not being disturbed, left to itself. Nature starts creating new things that don't come when we are just at a kind of lower mark of like 100 years, 200 years, and so on. So when I was in Białowieża, we were walking inside this highly protected zone, and they were just showing me like new species, super bright orange species of some kind of, they thought it's a mushroom, but then after a few days, it already were results. It is a kind of a new slime, and they don't really know what it is. They don't really know even which box to put it. But this is an organism they haven't observed before. But it's not just about that. It's about the gift that we are receiving as humans to really see the nature's intelligence in full glory. And technologies that are hidden in plain sight in old growth forests, I think are incredible. The kind of, by good level of observation, deep listening, and learning there directly from the system, not in the universities, but in this forest university, what we can actually absorb and learn and find solutions to the problems that we are facing as humanity right now. And so what I'm seeing, that's why I think we need these forest hubs everywhere. So not only we can grow with them and evolve with them, but we can also start learning with nature how she kicks back, how she restores herself, how she starts bringing species with all the different participants. So it's not just about the trees, it's about the birds, the mammals, the species returning, and they will return if we give them this kind of opportunity. So give yourself a gift, visit an old growth, and see for yourself what's the difference between a park, a an old growth forest or your garden, an old growth forest, so things a bit more tended but not tended but left alone. And of course, we have that reference now for Amazon basin, the forest of Amazon being cultivated.
Mm.
And I think there is no contradiction where needed, we need to intervene. Now we need to intervene because we kind of thinned, we destroyed so much biodiversity. So we do need to give back this support to bring back fertility to the land. But there is also cases where we need to step out a little bit and say, all right, show me what can you do, and then I can go and co-create, in certain cases. So there's no contradiction between human being part of that process, definitely not. And definitely we can co-create a lot and support a lot. But there's also a moment then we need to think, well, can we just be there and observe and learn?
I love the idea of forest universities, but yeah, I mean the accumulated knowledge, I mean literally genetically is extraordinary, and I've got a little quote up my sleeve, but I'd certainly echo your invitation for folks to go and visit genuine old growth because it has a very different character, and there will be some in the audience who will understand that sense of awe that you experience, and I think it is. You're quite right. It was a model for our medieval cathedrals here in Europe, um, and in Britain we've got very little, small patches, I suspect, of woodland that actually would could be defined as old growth. Uh, but still, it's in if we allow it, as they're trying to do in Germany, it can move towards that, and it can become a fantastic intergenerational resource for humans and other than human beings. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of bring in this little quote from late great mentor of mine, Stephen Howard Buhner from America, herbalist and earth poet, who I sadly never got the chance to meet, but writing about old growth, he says old growth plants, but obviously he can be he's referring to ecosystems and cultures as well, begin to take on a much different character than their younger offspring. And of course, Evgenia, you were pointing to this. He says there are states of being that only come into play with age and with the extensive development of expanded neural fields, by which he means root systems in the case of plants, but also these being amplified by mycorrhizal relationships. He goes on, the neuronal structure in an ancient redwood or an old growth Artemisia absinthium, which is wormwood, is different from that in younger plants. So are the memories and life experiences held within those neuronal structures. You see, plants become wise, he says, as they age. You can literally feel the difference such maturity brings in encountering old growth trees. And as I said, I think many people listening to this will have experienced that. And that's what you're pointing to. And I think as we, thinking positively, um, increasingly renew our connection with our wider nature, wider ecology, Gaia, um, I think these kind of old growth sanctuaries is the best word, isn't it, really? Your eternal forest sanctuaries will become, yeah, an obvious go-to, really, to kind of create, co-create, and to revere. I mean, that's the key word, isn't it? The
Mhm.
reverential relationship again.
Yeah, yeah. And just I wanted to kind of riff a little bit on what you have just said. I mean, I love that writer. I love Stephen. I also never met him. I think he really opened for so many people possibility to think about the communication and the depths of relationships that we could develop spiritually with more than human nature. And so many people studied with him. And I think why it's important is because I think we are now arriving to the point that we cannot do what we are meant to do alone. So we are calling upon so many other beings and species that are around us, both visible and invisible world. And when we talk about forest, and especially forest that's been people have been living around them and people have been doing work with this forest. Forests bring a matrix. It's also like when you said old growth culture, there is a matrix there. There's a cultural matrix. When we talk about nature, we talk about, okay, now it's important that we really experience this non-separation, that we are part of one consciousness, one nature. But also the same goes to culture. So we we think a lot, oh, culture is created by humans. Well, no, I mean, culture is created by all natural beings. And actually, forest culture is the collaborative work of both humans and those other more than humans. So trees, mycelium, all these complex relationships, animals, and animals we know from so many myths and fairy tales have entered our life and our consciousness. There's so many stories of humans coexisting with animals, shape-shifting, fairy tales from, from Russia, from Eastern Europe, from Germany, from Britain, the same as relationship with trees, how we give qualities to trees, how we generate certain qualities in us by having these qualities in certain trees in the forest. So what I'm trying to say is that I think it's really high time for us to reimagine forests as holding this depth of cultural knowledge. And of course, traditional people, indigenous people, they still hold that space. And when trees arrive, for example, from exotic, what we call exotic trees, they arrive from other countries, and that's my own personal experience. They don't just arrive; they bring with them a whole matrix of culture. So when I worked with eucalyptus trees, at some point it was revealed that yes, they are here, they're kind of suffering in these monocultures and they don't want to suffer, but they also have a reason to be here to show us the depths of disconnect and disruption that we created. They're pointing to something and they're also offering, so they told me themselves, they're offering a dreaming space, the active dreaming space, because they're actually the trees of the culture that actively dreams, the Aboriginal culture in Australia. So basically, what I realized, trees never come alone. Trees come bringing that whole matrix of cultural connections that's been created over centuries. And that's the beauty of it. So when we look once again at yet another invasive, so-called invasive or exotic species that arrived with its own capacity to the land, welcomed, not welcomed, we need to be very careful how we work with this, plant, what we can do together, what are they pointing to, what cultural activation that might be bringing, what shift they're proposing to
Mm,
us.
mm. There's two kind of related aspects there. I want to come back to the deep listening, but yeah, I was going to ask you about eucalyptus because I know in conversations we've had before, you because of the nature of eucalyptus in Portugal and its association with the terrible fires that happen there regularly and perhaps will increase with climate change. Um, it's tricky ground to walk on, um, but it's not really the eucalyptus's fault, not their fault because of the plantation aspect. Um, and the fact that you didn't want you didn't want to go there at all, but kept getting kind of messages from the eucalyptus plant being and eventually engage with it and then kind of had these realizations. Do you think given that it also does naturalize in Portugal, do you think there's a future integrated role for eucalyptus um, in the land that we call Portugal?
I'm going to be crucified after that by like both sides after this conversation. That already kind of almost happened. So this is what I'm trying to propose. So I think that, okay, if we stand on the position that all nature has intelligence, and actually every being has an agenda, Like really, like we have agenda, snails have agenda, hedgehogs, they have their own agenda. Not like the kind of egoistic agenda, but the agenda that is like the part of the essence of the being, the part of being that being. So the agenda is the blueprint or the green print with which this being emerges, is born. And humans kind of went very far away from our essence, like what is our essence? So therefore, what is our agenda? What is our offering to the world of being truly human? What does it actually mean? So that's the big question to ourselves. But when we look at certain trees, especially the kind of the so-called problematic species, now that we brought, our agenda brought these trees to different areas of the world. Eucalyptus trees are used in India, I think, for growing wood, in California for growing wood. It's all burning in Spain, in Portugal for paper. So that is a very specific agenda, and that agenda is very egoistic. So it's very one-pointed. There is no relationship there. Nobody tried to create relationship in that exchange. There was no permission asked. There was no permission asked from the land where it came from, of the tree itself, of the land where it's planted, at least these three aspects, of the people who hold the cultural matrix with which these trees have evolved. So all of that was bypassed completely. So we end up being shown that colonization does not just cannot pass just like that. We're going to reap the results, the consequences of this type of colonization, which is very recent in case of this tree. So what the trees I think are showing us is that, guys, you can make a shift happen. And the trees already told me we're not going anywhere. Like once we are here, we fixed. And yes, the tree can naturalize. The tree has an incredible capacity for regeneration. I know lots of projects where people in syntropic and regenerative way are using this tree to create. It's a fast growing tree. It can pull, it has very deep roots, for example, different to oaks. In certain areas, in certain conditions, it pulls the water from underneath the surface, and it also can redistribute water to the rest of the plants around for specific number of time, for a specific number of months or years. It creates biomass. So you could do all kinds of, you can collaborate with the stream. And then that other element that these trees can hold, the dreaming space for us. For me personally, what I can see, it's also the bridge to another culture across oceans. And this tree is also trying to call us into, actually, there's something there to learn from that connection. So yes, the trees definitely are not going anywhere. I think there's immense potential that we even don't know yet for collaboration, medicinal exchange. This tree is medicine throughout. We know that, right? And essential oils, the bark, the leaves, tannins. I've done personally as an artistic work using the quality that the tree has, circulating tannins throughout the tree and dropping it in the ground and then bringing it back into the tree. That's why the tree has this kind of quality that nothing really grows around, because tannin presence is very high. So I use the presence in the bark and the leaves of tannins to create these beautiful botanical prints, kind of the imprints of the tree essence. So we are not really looking at all these beautiful offerings that the tree is there to give us freely almost. We're just looking at one particular thing. We need paper. We can get paper from so many sources, but there's of course like a very strong lobby, and this is a protocol, and this is whole economic program associated with it, very, very highly extractive. But there is a shift, starting a movement towards like, how can we actually collaborate with these trees in a very different way? Yeah, there's
Right.
definitely possibilities.
Yeah. No, I mean that's music to my ears because as a so-called reconciliation ecologist, that's what that term is really all about. Finding ways to express our human agency with rather than over, and what our plant kin, and that's what Plantae convivae, my Substack, is all about. Um, so this was the other bit I wanted to kind of zoom in on, the kind of the deep listening aspect. And I had the great privilege of being on a panel recently with Patrick McManaway, again for Resurgence, and it was all about interspecies and interbeing communication, which I think the audience members will be able to find online, and I shall try and remember to put that link in the show notes as well. But yeah, so he's known as this land whisperer, and is very matter of fact about communicating with fairy folk and the elementals. And I'm meeting more and more people like this, and it's really fascinating. So one question to you would be, have you engaged with the fairy folk and the elementals of the land that you've been working with, not just the human communities? And um, one of the ways he's described it, and it was coming through in your words just now. He used kind of modern references like WhatsApp, as long as you get everyone around the table, not just the human stakeholders, but the elementals and the plants and the fungi, etc. Get everyone around the table, everyone in the same WhatsApp group, and allow them all to express their needs and listen, in the round. It's amazing what you can achieve. Everyone goes, okay, you've asked permission. Now you've stated what you as humans need. And there's these other plant beings or other non-human beings, and they all express their needs through these, I don't know, quantum channels, however it's done. And consensus can be reached. And it's like, okay, yes, that's fine now. Now we understand, and we can make that happen. And have you experienced, so the two aspects, have you experienced those kind of synergistic evolving relationships, as a follow-on to have you engaged with elementals and fairy folk and such like?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you that there's lots and lots coming up, and more people are being called to listen. And actually, that is big part of listening, because giving space and time to listen to more than human, whether visible or invisible, spirit world, or those like actual physical species that are, I mean, that's both. They're not disconnected, just like us, right? It's all connected. So yes, I've been called a lot at the beginning and now and deeper, and connecting with specific trees, eucalyptus trees, oak trees, been inviting me mainly through the dream space, because dream space for me is much more open space than like awakened life. But I'm also working on kind of crossing the thresholds and bringing that active dreaming into everyday life. And definitely when we are in the process of designing, walking the land, designing a forest sanctuary, designing the seeds that we created in Portugal, that smaller kind of structures, geometric structures around which eternal forest will grow. Definitely the first process is really tuning in with the land and all the species of the land, and really hearing what is their dream and what they want in this land to happen. So hearing the water of the land, hearing the rocks, hearing the land, and then really observing and listening, what are the animals doing, and by when they show up, what messages that they're bringing and which stages of what we call project. Because for me, it's not a project. Is if we're talking about restoration, regeneration, and care along during very, very deep periods of time, we're talking about this establishing continuous channels of conversation. So I think that that idea of, WhatsApp group where everybody is in and all the voices are included, in other way, we can call it the Council of All Beings, which I think was coined by Joanna Macy, if I'm not mistaken. But just the idea of council is a very ancient idea. The circle, the council, us getting together, and every voice is being heard, and every voice can have its own proposal or sharing its need, its dream. And I think it's very, very important to open human circles to engage with the kinship with more than humans, to bring them into the conversation. They have just so much to give and to contribute to this conversation.
Mhm.
And then when it comes to co-creation, we also have to consider when we are designing with the land, when we are designing for both animal, plant kingdom, other kingdoms, and human experience, we have to do together. We have to kind of cater or design for all of this to enjoy the place together. And then I think only then we can have places where the collaboration can really happen, because we don't want just to go again into that mode of we're going to restore the land and we're going to do all this ecological work. But again, we're bypassing, we're not giving enough space for deep cultural work to be done between all the species that are present. So yes, I've had very deep experiences when I was working, for example, in Fire Brava in Koa Valley, in this beautiful ancient river valley that has the presence of our ancestors, both human and more than human, that has engravings in the deep canyon of up to 30,000 years ago that people left of these beautiful wild animals that roam this land that completely disappeared. And when I look at this, I'm actually with their presence fully. They're in the invisible realm, but I can work with them because first of all, we don't know if any of them might want to return, and that is possible. We don't know what is their essence and what is their dream and what is their role and the story in all of this. Even that they have gone into from visible, from presence, from physical incarnation to the invisible realm, they're still there. And those engravings in the rocks, they're not just a cultural UNESCO heritage. They are, for me, very active presence of those that just transitioned into kind of another dimension. The same goes to the presence of our ancestors who were working with this land, who were hunting there, who were gathering, who were living in this incredibly fertile place. So how can we co-create with all of that circle and not just a team of 5 people arriving there and doing ecosystem restoration? There are layers to this, and I think the more we open the circle, the richer we become in this process.
Mm. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And it may sound woo-woo to some, but what was woo-woo just a few years ago seemingly is no longer. You hear all sorts of seemingly strange subjects being spoken by very ordinary people these days. But if we were to speak to indigenous culture, they would say, well, of course, what you're saying is as clear as day to us. It always has been. So I think we will be hearing more and more about this and hopefully applying these values and this kind of more extensive, deeper listening, as you've described it, in across human society and out into wider ecological society. We can only hope anyway. Now, I'd love to talk to you too, that it's all related, but you mentioned the fact that you use sacred geometry. So I'd love for you to kind of just briefly outline
Mhm.
how you see the role of sacred geometry, but also in this work generally, the role of artists we can accept. I think you're brilliantly placed to kind of bridge divides and gaps. But perhaps also, and this is something that really interests me in relation to those who I refer to as plantae non gratae, those unwelcome plants in our gardens, parks, and landscapes, the weeds and the so-called invasives. I think trauma, particularly collective and ancestral trauma, plays a key role in how those relationships have manifest. So, do you see a role for trauma-informed specialists, therapists, shall we say, in this kind of work as well? So, sacred geometry and the role of trauma-informed practitioners.
You gave me like 3 questions in one. How many minutes do I have?
Plenty, plenty.
Okay. Well, let's go first to the art part of things and then keep maybe that question. If I go too deep and I forget, then you remind me. So, um, I had some very beautiful experiences when I was a kid in geometry class. It was like I was really young. And the teacher showed us, she drew something on the board, on this blackboard. We used to have the blackboards. I don't know if they still have them. And she showed me how parallel lines can cross in space. She's like, parallel lines can cross. I was like, for a kid's mind, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So it's really, and then she erased it and she said, oh yeah, but this is for later. And it really stayed with me, right? And then when I bumped into I love geometry always. I was always drawing like structures. So I am, as an artist, for example, I do calligraphy work. I studied with Japanese, Chinese calligraphers because I'm very connected to word and poetry. So it's very organic connection. But that other part is I love geometric construction. I love structures. I love shapes and forms. And especially I love how something that is drawn on paper can then be in three-dimensional, four-dimensional, and so I love to imagine these very complex spaces and how geometry can manifest itself in kind of beyond three-dimensional form. And I've done a lot of work with various types of immersive technologies, digital technologies to show that, to experiment with that. And then when I arrived and started working with the land and started thinking about designs, quite organically emerged this idea, well, what if designs were made in this more like geometric way of the shapes that actually have not just symbology, but behind all the symbology in all the star shapes and various shapes that we have across cultures, there's actually something else, the structures that are life inducing and they are life supporting, and they also can direct energy. So they can basically, let's not talk about energies, but the flow of nature, the life force of nature that is in the land, that is in us, that is in all beings. So there are people who work with geomancy very well, and I'm kind of still learning, and I would love to go more. So if there are any specialists in geomancy working specifically with land, with designs on land, I'd love to connect with these people, and I'd love to collaborate with them because they know how to work with these present energies in the land with water flows, and we can actually enhance a lot of potential of the land with that. But what I have done so far is we've done three different designs. The first design we implemented was the 8-pointed star. It's a very simple design. And what we did, we used the 8-pointed star to then plant trees in the intersections of the star and the points of the star. And these are 25 species. So the 8-pointed star is not just any kind of symbol in the Mediterranean, across the whole Mediterranean and beyond, Eastern Europe, you name it. This is a very, very, very important shape and form and structure. And it's the Venus and its fertility, its rebirth, regeneration. It has very many meanings. And specifically in the Mediterranean, it is still preserved on many drawings, architecture, and in the clothes when they do designs in the clothes.
Wow.
In Cyprus, for example, you have it everywhere, and so on. So this star is also used by some people in Russia. They are recreating sacred groves. I don't know if any has been planted according to the shape. They're creating a much more complex shapes there, haven't arrived to that point. But I decided to do this, and I just decided to see what's going to happen. So we did implement this shape, and just the signs that I've seen and what followed the process from 1 year. It was done in June last year. It was implemented. We planted the trees in November, and now past 1 year, and I returned to this place just now to see that the project is growing. They want to do more work in restoration of the river, and actually they're welcoming the project. And I think community questioned it a bit because it's so far away from the Catholic religion that is very present in this land. But now I think people are embracing it and they really enjoyed it because it's something meaningful. And the moment the trees take the positions and the structure is held, I think it starts affecting the space. So here, just to say, I'm very, very interested to explore this further, not just the sacred geometry for its sake, but how creating certain parts of the forest laying the structure there with rocks, with trees that are serving pillars of the space, and directing the energy flow and also the human experience around that space can actually affect the thriving ecologies of the space. So that's my kind of hypothesis. This is my kind of PhD question in this whole process. So that's one part. And I know that there are more people who are experimenting with that. So the one that we created for Fire Brava is modeled on it's a 4-petal knot that goes on in itself. It's like an eternal labyrinth. And the idea there is when you can enter from any point from the directions, but once you're inside this path, then you just go indefinitely. And as you go through, you experience, you have the different experiences because the trees and the plants are planted in a certain way. So you'd be passing through certain areas and connecting to these trees. And all of these trees are, of course, from that area, and they have symbolism, but also they have this ecological capacity. And that kind of is inspired by ancient Minoan seals that people still don't know where they come from, why they were making them, all these strange doodles, but those are not doodles. They're even they are designs. I think the designs that we have of the flows of the land and the consciousness that were even before the first labyrinths were created. So that this ancient. So that's the part that I'm interested exploring in the land and seeing how many more of these different designs we can create. But also the design has to be rooted in that land, in that culture. It has to be informed. It has to almost like emerge from the place. It's not something that's put on top of the place. It's something that needs to be like, why are we actually putting this design? What dots is it connecting? So then the question of art. For me, this is a really big question because I come from contemporary art background. I've observed contemporary art world for many years. I've put myself quite intentionally in this process a little bit on like, what else can we do? As opposed to just creating large scale artworks and putting it in shows, biennales, and all these big forums. And then artists sitting kind of in the background and actually is not very regenerative because we're creating art with a lot of financial resources. It's sitting in big collections, and it's not really delivering. It's not really playing an active role in restoring our relationship with planet Earth, and also activating society into action. So some of it, yes, and some of it is just like, I see it as like big buffer zone where the money is just sitting. So money is also flow. Art systems are incredibly connected with the flow, our current financial system. It's actually completely running, and it's been informed by this financial system that is kind of in transition and transformation. So what I'm very interested in is how, with the work that we're doing with Eternal Forest, we're not just restoring our relationship with the place, we're also restoring our relationship with wealth, with capital, with understanding what money can do, and kind of helping people who really want to make a difference to steward their wealth into the place-based work through art as well. And then by virtue of doing this, give artists, contemporary artists who want to do this work with the land, with restoration, with communities, and put their effort, their methodologies into restoring places, then have support necessary to do this work through these financial streams that are going to start finding redirection. So I'm very much looking at this from holistic perspective, systemic perspective. It's not just, oh, as artists, how can we get to do this work and get paid and get this work commissioned, just like the land artists have done. And they kind of paved the way for us, these incredible men and women. And they received incredibly high value commissions to move large tracts of land, some consciously, some semi-consciously, some in regenerative, some in non-regenerative ways. But we have this benchmark art that is there present in our psyche and in our art history. And I think now is really the way to review what has been done and what art can do differently. And what I'm very interested in is how can art help design those spaces for deeper human experience with the land, with the place, with communities, and also how it can give back and help renew, restructure the world of contemporary art. So it opens up its walls and invites communities in, invites nature in, it goes outside of the museum spaces. And we know that lots of galleries and museums are struggling, galleries are closing, because we cannot just endlessly produce objects. We need to rethink how art can be that thing in service of that transformation that we're experiencing.
It's brilliant and really powerful, and I mean, it's the evolution of art in many ways. But I mean, the reflection I've got for you is that, as I understand it, and sacred geometry is thousands, if not going back deeper in time. Um, but it sacred geometry kind of describes the fabric of existence, but it's the structure through which the energy flows, and that energy obviously can include financial energy. So there's the creation of sacred geometries on the ground, but also in the process as well that you're deploying that can open the floodgates, one hopes, for those philanthropic funds, or kind of national kind of resources going into an intergenerational project that will benefit the 7 generations hence and so forth. Oh, that's really interesting. We've covered some wonderful ground in this conversation. So finally, yeah, that point about trauma and of having the benefits of having trauma-informed artists or any other kinds of practitioners involved in these kinds of projects probably is going to be quite valuable moving forward, I would have thought.
Definitely. So what I have personally experienced, I'll share one specific experience, and I think that people might connect with that. So first of all, just to say, the way I see the space of eternal forest sanctuaries, it's imagined like is the space that are created and then they have to be used. They have to be used by all kinds of practitioners. My idea is that for us to reestablish the culture, we need cycles. And those cycles can be artistic residencies, celebrations, deep quality retreats, vision quests, forest bathing, trauma healing processes. So anything from art to healing art to then education and what kinds of education, how education is also shifting. So it's a whole spectrum. So this space in the forest is not just a space of the forest, is a laboratory for our growth, for our evolution. So all kinds of practitioners are very welcome to enter. And we are currently in the process of inviting them and start weaving those spaces together. So then there is this experience that I had with the land, and I had multiple experiences like this with my land that I'm stewarding since 3 years. It's a private land for now. And then the projects that we have been creating. So just to share this very brief reflection, with the land that we are living with, there's been some experiences in this land since the previous owners that I've experienced as disruption of the flow in the land. And so what the land has called us to do is to reconnect this flow. And this motif of reconnecting the flow in the land has been present for the last probably 6 years since I saw it first time in one land that I visited as potential project. And so what happens is when the land is inviting you into that process of healing, whatever trauma the land has experienced, it is also inviting you into your own process of healing. And these processes are happening side by side, mirror to mirror, completely intertwined. So the moment you pull one thread, you pulling also something inside of you. And as you are releasing whatever is holding you back in evolution, you're also helping the land to release. And if you're doing that intentionally, this work, then it just works like it's like a click that happens. And then, holding ceremonies for the water, it's always connected with the inner waters. Holding ceremonies for the biodiversity, reinviting the species, it's also reinviting the wells and the abundance back into your life. So everything is mirrored all the time completely. Working with the fire in the ceremonial way is also helping to protect the land and to reinvite the warmth and the balance of fire in the land. So then I had this wonderful experience in Fire Brava, which I couldn't believe it was happening, as I was there immersed 5 days full on. It was like a vision quest in its own way. When we were observing, listening, we were also filming a lot. It was like a very deep process. And I came back home and I felt this very deep sense of connection with that land, to the point that I didn't know where my body ends and where the body of the land begins, together with the river and the space and the trails. It was like my body became the land. And
Mm.
it's impossible to explain that in human words. It probably I have to write about it. But I realized that the moment we open the conversation with the land, and we are usually invited. It's very, very, very rare when we're like, oh, I want to work with that land. It's like you're already invited by the land because the land needs you there. The moment we open this conversation is the very deep process that starts happening. So answering your question in this kind of tangential way, there is endless amount of work that needs to be done, both on working with our own traumas, but never separate, in my view, never separate from, it's like co-healing. It's part of co-evolution. It's releasing things, the structures, the physical structures sometimes that are there, that are blocks in our psyche or in our bodies that we need to release to become a whole human, but also to become interrelated, interconnected with that wider circle, wider council that we were talking about. So for me, what really opened up through this work with Eternal Forest is that continuous reciprocal movement, continuous reciprocal transformation. And I think that by creating those physical spaces and offering them to all kinds of practitioners that can do that work in that way by bringing people in those places, I think it's brilliant, and I think it's necessary, and I think it's going to be mutually beneficial for the whole restoration and regeneration process, not just the ecological part, but also psychological, spiritual, emotional,
Yeah,
mental.
yeah.
Yes.
It's way beyond powerful, and a line by the US poet, I think Drew Dellinger comes to mind. Let me be a fierce, clear mirror in a cosmos made of passions.
Mm.
Yeah, no, amazing. Wonderfully eloquent as ever, Evgenia. Thank you so much for joining me here today. And I hope this conversation creates a lot of value for people who end up listening to it in time. Now, one final point, obviously, where can people go to find out more about you, your work, Eternal Forest, and the sanctuaries, which are not just in Portugal? The vision goes beyond Portugal, and how they can contact you and maybe even support the work financially or otherwise.
Wonderful. Thank you for this question. As we are creating a network and as we are rooting this work in Portugal, because that's where I live, so it's easier to start here, we are very, very open to the land stewards who already consider themselves to be land stewards, or they want to transition from land ownership to land stewardship, This can be private land, it can be communal land, it can be a project that is just setting up on the level of community or municipality or like a small local project. We also very much open working with universities, foundation, artistic foundations, because they also have land sometimes, and working with tree planting organization, conservation organizations, forest parks. So the range of people that we're inviting into this network is basically anybody who wants to be steward of the land, create an eternal forest in perpetuity to be protected in perpetuity. And we are currently mapping inspirational projects, and we're also mapping projects that would like to go together and do that work. Whether it takes 2 years or 10 years or 20 years, it doesn't really matter. So it's like intentional forest sanctuaries. We're definitely looking for support like philanthropic funding, possibilities, opportunities, funds, all sorts of people who either private or organized foundations who can support this work both locally and globally. In terms of concrete possibilities and points of connection in space and time, we are creating an eternal forest camp at the gathering in Portugal, 21st to 27th of September. And we will be actually during 7 days working in a very consolidated way, prototyping how to create an eternal forest from scratch. So it's a very practical week where anybody can join, and whoever is interested in collaborating on this in the future, this is perfect timing to join and to be in this event and to co-create together. And we actually have an agreement with the local council to create an eternal forest. So this is our kind of step one.
Wow. Mhm.
And we want to create a toolkit and a model coming out of this so we can share with more communities. So that's one, and that's in Portugal. And another one is if anybody is listening from the US, we are starting to activate Eternal Forest Network in San Francisco Bay and California. And that's going to be activated through October events and through April art biennale that has to do with art, nature, and ecology. So we are going to do 9 months development towards that. So anybody who is in that area, I'm very, very happy to connect. And our website is eternalforest.earth. And then we have Telegram channel, community channel, we have Substack, so you can find everything on the website. And yeah, join our community days, our community events online and find out more. And we are very much welcoming and expecting people leading this process. It's not Eternal Forest NGO that's going to make it all happen. We are there as support mycelial rhizomatic structure to give voice and to give possibility for people to do this work and also create a mutually supportive movement. So
Mm.
that's our role. So we expect you to be able to do this work locally. And of course, I think only by doing this together, we can really create, we can help create the place and the planet and the space that is much more biodiverse, thriving, and whole.
It's
Yeah.
kind of self-empowerment across scales.
That's
But you're gathering in Portugal. I think you said it starts on the 21st of September, which is not only my birthday, but it's more importantly the International Day of Peace. So
beautiful.
that's a nice, if you didn't know that, that's a nice kind of launch pad as well. Anyway, thank you for all of those references, and no, thank you again. It's the project and your work, and you are like super inspiring. So thank you again for joining us today, and enjoy your weekend, which is almost upon us.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Evgenia, and we could have spoken for hours, and I'm sure we'll have you back at some point in time. So. Um, Thank you and cheerio. Bye bye.